Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Appreciate it. And with the public meeting tonight, one thing that we always like to do is open up the mics for anybody in the audience to talk. And this would be about a subject other than what's on the agenda today. It's just a free open mic for anybody to talk. Is there anybody that would like to bring anything to the attention of the people? Okay. All right. Well, then with that, I guess we'll go back to our meeting. Can you hear this?
Sounds low.
Oh, how about now?
That's better.
Okay. Then would like county to recap what they had from last week, and then I know there's been some new developments since the meeting prior, and inform everybody of where we're at with
Okay.
those. That'd be appreciated.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Mike McAllister, the Planning Director, and Karen Burig, the Transportation Planning Manager to my right. And we're here for a continued hearing to discuss the long-range planning program for the Planning and Zoning Division and Land Use in the Transportation Department for 2018 and 2019. And this, we had a meeting 2 weeks ago to begin discussions about that work program. It is a little bit more informal than a regular public hearing. We just refer to it as a public meeting. But we do anticipate the Planning Commission discussing the work program and making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners this evening, if at all possible. At the last meeting 2 weeks ago, we did not have a quorum, but we opened up the meeting and took public testimony from those folks who were at the audience at that time. We did indicate that we would be continuing the meeting till tonight, and with an opportunity for folks to testify again, or if there's new people in the audience who did not testify last week, for an opportunity to do that tonight. The only new information that we have for the Planning Commission at this point in time is a memo from Karen Burig and myself responding to some comments we received from the rhododendron CPO. And Karen will, in just a minute, kind of summarize that memo and actually a change in the recommendation for the work program in response to that. I also received, just before the hearing, there was an email with a PDF regarding the Heritage Tree Program proposal that we heard last week or 2 weeks ago. It was a rather large document, so we did not have an opportunity to print that all out. I have 2 copies of kind of a summary. It's 8 or 9 pages of a summary of the Heritage Tree Program. I anticipate maybe you may hear some testimony about that. With that, I'm going to just hand it over to Karen to kind of summarize the memo regarding rhododendron CPO, and then we can move into any questions you have, and then any sort of public comment tonight.
Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. So you did included in your packet was this memo. So we have been working with the Rhododendron CPO. They had originally submitted a request to be on the work program. When we put together the proposal for the work program for 1819, their proposal was listed as NRA. It's on the 3rd page of the project's description. And I think there was, we were working, trying to communicate, trying to understand where this project fit in. As you know, the long-range planning work program really lists the projects that are changes to the zoning development ordinance, changes to the comp plan, or changes to other plans that we have. And so when we were originally talking with them, we were trying to figure out how it fit in to this framework, since at least from the planning side, we had worked recently on the Villages of Mount Hood pedestrian and bikeway plan. The village, Rhododendron is very interested in improving safety in their community, specifically around crossing of Highway 26, beginning to put sidewalks in, creating an environment that will help slow traffic down so that people can cross Highway 26 to be able to access the transit stops that are being used more and more. So as we we heard feedback both in written testimony and then people from last week were trying to also figure out how we can work with what the intent was. And I think what we had heard is that the intent was to figure out how we can make a project happen, actually, which is a capital project. Moving from there is a project within our plan through the Villages of Mount Hood plan to improve sidewalks, crossings, and look at those things. But now what we're talking about is moving into a capital project. One of the things, after last meeting, I spoke both with a representative from ODOT, actually a couple of representatives from ODOT, and one highlighted that in the Villages of Mount Hood plan, in Appendix 3 of Villages of Mount Hood plan, there was actually a list of comments submitted by ODOT that would need to be looked at during implementation, such as, in order to do the crossings, really being able to look at all of the different safety considerations. What are those key considerations that need to occur before those crossings and sidewalks need to happen? I also spoke with a woman from what's called their Quick Response Program, and that's a program that we haven't used before. We typically use their broader granting program, their TGM grants and those are grants to change plans, whereas the Quick Response Program actually may fit in with this particular project because it has more to do with how do we implement these plans. But they only have a certain pot of money available, and we would have to go through the processes to see if this is an actual fit. So what we're proposing is that we actually add into the work program, even though it isn't a plan. This is more similar to what was included for the Park Avenue project last year, where we said we will work with the community to find funding. So we're recommending that we work with the community of Rhododendron to see if the Quick Response Program is the appropriate fit to identify the issues that ODOT has identified related to implementation of the sidewalks and the crossings and improvements for the bus stops. But in order to do that, we also recommend taking one of the projects off of the transportation planning work program because we have limited time. So we're recommending taking off project T6, which is the Development and Review Performance Measures. It had just a small amount of FTE and probably comparable amount of work. The Development Review Performance Measures work item was one that came out of a past project that we did, where we were looking at the measures we used during development review to assess the impact to the transportation system. And the measures we have right now are very automobile-centric, so we would be also looking at how measures that related to the pedestrian and bicycle system could be implemented into the development review process. So since there isn't immediacy related to that particular item, we would suggest removing that from the work program and adding in a project that would be specifically to work with the community of Rhododendron to see if this funding source. So with that,
Question.
I can either answer questions. Yes.
What will be the number of that?
Oh, the number, well, right now, the number is NRA 1, but we would, no, sorry, it's NRA
Yeah.
is the project that we were talking about, but we would need to revise the description of that project to say specifically work with the community, the CPO, Rhododendron CPO, to identify funding specifically the Quick Response Program and see if it's an appropriate mix, a fit for identifying the implementation of the sidewalks crossings.
Well, I guess my question would be if we're going to take T6 out,
Oh.
would it become T6?
Oh.
Or
Well,
would we call
Sure.
it 28?
Sure, there you go. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for that executive
Okay.
decision.
Okay. Commissioner Fitz?
I want to make sure I understand. So I remember the plan, around the villages, and we talked about slowing 26 to be able to cross it, bike lanes, what you're saying is ODOT came back with a comment on that, that before you'd be able to implement the plan, you had to answer their list in that memo. Is that correct? Is that what causing us to be here?
So during the plan process and as a part of the plan, ODOT brought forward the fact that there were going to be several things that would need to be looked at in order to implement those particular projects.
And that was after we passed that plan forward, or that was in the process?
I
'Cause
think that was in the process. I can't tell you specifically. I could look. But I do know that it was adopted as a part of it's Appendix 3 of the plan. And the letters are dated June 2016 and May.
So we had noticed, we passed our plan, and then that plan stalled, waiting on ODOT to agree to it.
Oh.
Beyond, so we went, so basically that plan had to be amended by LCDC. County Commission agreed it, then it goes LCDC, then comes back. That's our vision, our plan, but we still have ODOT. We didn't deal with it at that time.
So I was not the project manager of that
Oh,
particular.
I'm just trying to figure
so
out why
I
this
don't know
is-
the timing.
Yeah.
I think that when we identify projects, sometimes we don't have all the answers. So we don't have all of the answers, and the project which we could agree upon is improved crossings of Highway 26 and sidewalks, and be able to address streetscape. And so that's how it's written. But ODOT knew that in order to put those in, that there would be specific things that would need to be looked at before they would be
Well,
able to say, yes, we can put a crossing in.
But is an intergovernmental agreement with ODOT on paths that don't exist today really a holdup on? I mean, is that hard to?
I
Because when I read their
yeah.
memo, it doesn't look like, I don't understand why this is, it strikes me as kind of a weird thing for the project, that snow removal and plans on safety, when that would definitely have to be addressed with a public process. The I don't understand why this is back to us when we passed a plan that was part of it.
So first, I would say, in essence, it's not really back to you, because what we won't be changing a plan. What this is actually the first step into design.
Yeah.
So typically, we wouldn't move into this until we had funding for a full construction project, and then you would be working out the details of design. But some of these elements will really help us be able to access funding better. So it will be able to help us kind of get over perhaps some humps. So what the project will end up being, it may look like a streetscape design, or it may look like a design that addresses ODOT's requirements.
I apologize, but so we're here, we're going to spend maybe hours on this. They're going to testify. We spent time reading all their, what decision do we make other than, yeah, that's part of the plan and we should go forward? I don't understand why we're hearing it.
So the PED bike plan provided some concepts and policies for what that area should look like to address pedestrian bike safety.
I remember it, yeah.
I guess all this is doing is drilling down on some of those concepts and things, and what does it actually look like? How is it designed? And what are the specifics of that? And the idea is to find some money to support that, if you will, further design plan, which moves it towards implementation. And it doesn't mean, and then the next step beyond that is then the ability, and some of these projects are on the TSP or on the CIP, and then the next step for that is then you begin to find money for that. But it is drilling down, I think, on the designs, the specific designs that are already in concept in the bike PED plan.
Yeah, and I think
And that requires broad sort of coordination with ODOT and the county, because it's their system.
It's very good that the county is continuing to bring this out into the open public meeting so everybody can hear about what's being thought of as the new designs progress. When it first comes to us, it's just at a concept level. It's never, a lot of times they never go beyond that, even when you'll get exceptions from people. We'll get overlays and multiple things. They never go forward. And that's the idea here, that we're bringing it all to the public, and that's why we had them talk last time, and we want to hear more today. And I think it's really great to see everybody who's come in here tonight to share more information with us. So.
And Commissioner,
I've been where they're at,
Yeah.
and I'm going to tell you that I appreciate what you do, But when you start queuing up lots of meetings to have lots of hearings where there isn't an actual decision to move the football forward, I mean, they're trying to maintain a community involved and focused to get this done, and creating more meetings actually, it causes them to spend political capital. And I'm just saying, as somebody who's been in their place in Portland, where they create transportation things and then they disappear if they don't get the answer they want and pop them up someplace, we need to respect their time and only have meetings where they're actually getting a decision. I'm interested in hearing about it. I'm excited to see this, but I'm just saying to staff, I don't think this is, I don't understand why it's in front of us, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Maybe another time we could address format and agendas, but I think that's,
Moving the
Thanks for-
football.
So if I could just follow with one more question. So I'm trying to scan Steve Graper's letter, and I'm looking at my notes from the last meeting. It may be wrong, but my recollection was this community is looking for improved crossing on 26, some sidewalk issues to be addressed, and then there was also discussion about safer bus stops, right? And so is the goal here to try and work with ODOT and work with that community to come up with some money and a process to solve those particular, it's not necessarily about the whole plan that was passed before, but the goal is to try and solve these very concrete, items that were raised at the last meeting,
Right.
correct?
I think
Okay,
just trying to
that's helpful.
start to move that concept and design forward.
Great,
Yeah, and it will be incrementally, probably.
awesome, thank you.
all right. Well, with that, thank you for bringing us all up to speed on what has changed. And then I'd like to also reopen the mics for the public hearing here.
Absolutely.
Or public comments. And do we have some new test requests here? Quite a few, good. Okay. All right. And one thing as we're going through these, would like everybody to consider that if you've come up here and spoken before, that you don't come up again and speak on the same subject. And it's a matter of, we have to respect those from the past, because it was one open meeting. We don't want to keep going over and over the same subjects. And so I would ask that everybody respect that as we move forward. And we have quite a few people here to talk, and so we want to make sure that we're following the time allowed here, which is between 1 to 3, is it 3 minutes tops this time? Is that
It-
2 to 3 minutes? is
You
what
have
we'll
the
go.
discretion
Okay.
to do that.
So
Three.
try to go within 3 minutes, definitely. Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to call the first two people, and when you get up to the mic, please state your name and address for the record.
No, we're not doing addresses.
So there was a discussion at the last Plan Commission meeting,
Let me see.
that it is not necessary to provide your address if you do not want to.
Yeah,
I want to make clear that if you want to get on any sort of mailing list, or you want staff to get back to you, then we need an email or a phone number, but you're not required to provide your address.
okay, so,
We can just say where they're from.
so
though.
it could be, somebody could say they're anonymous, and that's what it is, okay. All right, so we've got Ramones and Notes and L Notes, please. That's the overall idea, because if somebody wants to say, hey, I'm anonymous, here's my opinion.
So we're not here to discuss the rhododendron area?
No,
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. My name is Ramona Knotts. I live at 30200 South Shandell Road in Molalla, tax lot 405. Our property is zoned EFU, exclusive farm use. The land up the road is EFU, 11512 South Barnards Road. We are all stewards of the land, and it's our generation's responsibility to care for the land. I was a nursery manager for 25 years. I did my part. Dairyland is now concrete pads. Hayfields are now concrete. Agricultural land, now concrete. Clackamas County, stewards of the land, concrete is covering the farmlands.
My name is Albert Knotts. I live on the same address as my wife does. We've been married for 52 years. We lived on our property in Molalla for approximately, 25 years?
38.
38 years, okay? I live by a farm, Morehouse Farms, that they have raised on the property. Corn, wheat, cattle, cucumbers, cauliflower, strawberries, beans, and on and on. They have commercial buildings, farm buildings on there that they store their equipment on and everything. Nice, nice buildings and stuff. We have Ginrich Farms up the road from us, which have acres and acres of blueberries. They have a big commercial building that they process their blueberries in. Okay. Also, we have a big Filbert farm up the road. We have a large clover field up the road from us. And approximately up the road, we have a big, huge nursery that has probably 50 to 100 acres. They have covered their property probably an acre with greenhouses that produce the starch that they put out on their fields and stuff. Okay. What do these farmers have in common? They provide food for us. They provide plants for oxygen for us. And excuse me, I'm not used to speaking, I'm sorry.
Take your time.
And in between these farms that are good stewards of the land, they plant cover crops, they replenish their land with good soil so they can grow their crops again. But in between these farms up the road, there's a 300,000 square foot of steel frame structures, multi-licensed industrial park, marijuana grow building site. They don't even use the soil that these sites are on. They import their own soil. They're destroying it. They have no water rights. Guess how they're going to get their water? They're going to truck it in. They're required to have 50,000 gallons of water on site. They're in the process of applying for water rights. Well, the Morehouse Farms just across the roads years ago just had to re-drill so they can get down to the water that they need for their farming, so they can grow crops so we can eat.
Okay. You could.
Traffic. Okay, we got a lot of traffic on Bunards Road. It's a cut through from Wilsonville and Tualatin and all that, and this marijuana farm will create approximately 250 extra cars a day on this road, and all the service vehicles and everything else, and everybody that's associated with this marijuana park.
Okay. So if you could work on kind of wrapping it up here. we'd
Okay,
appreciate
yeah,
it.
well, the farmers use these roads to move their large equipment and all this kind of stuff. It's going to create a mess. And security, we've had shootings up the road, I don't know if you heard on the news, on Bernards and Markham Highway, we've had shootings up the road, people shooting cars up there. And the security, what kind of security you going? You got 25 acres of corn, you got 25 acres of a marijuana farm.
Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up your time here, sir.
Okay.
So,
I'm giving some of my time to him.
Yeah, I was gonna say she could
Yeah.
yield hers, but.
you can start to wrap. Is that your last comment?
No, I just want to take, I'll go to the last of my, my deal. I had a lot to say, but anyways, the property on 115125 Bernards Road is not consistent with the land use in the area. 50 to 50 businesses on this property. It's not the property owner that's growing this marijuana. He's leasing all these businesses. So we got 50 businesses with cement pads, metal frame buildings on 25 acres and destroying the farmland. I feel sorry for the people that live next to this thing. They've dug out for the buildings and built a 6-foot wide berm all the way down their property line, and they got these big metal buildings all up and down their property line.
Okay.
Yeah, and the traffic, is the county willing to put out extra money for road improvements, widen our roads? It's a narrow road, narrow farm road, and extra security out there? Is the county willing to do that? Well, I was in a meeting with the commissioners the other day, and Menard said that
Thank
they
you.
only collected. No,
Thank you for all your conversation tonight.
I have a point.
May-
All the
may-
things that you,
I'm sorry, maybe I can just give some context to the work program in this discussion.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
sorry to interrupt it.
That's
Maybe
all right.
I'll answer your question. So there, Mr. Knotts is referring to a marijuana production, a property that has been approved by Clackamas County. On that property, it's, I don't know the exact square footage, he probably cited it right. It's multiple buildings.
300,000.
It's multiple buildings on the property. It's currently allowed under the county zoning ordinance. It's been approved by the county to proceed. For context, there is a project on the work program. It is L3, and it is a proposal to amend the zoning and development ordinance to limit the number of production licenses per lot of record or per parcel. So right now, there is no limit in the EFU zone on the number of production licenses that can occur. And this proposal is to limit that. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's 1 per parcel or 2 per parcel or so many per acre or whatever it is, but the idea is to look at that issue.
Yes.
That sort of standard, when the marijuana ordinances were adopted, I think it was kicked around a little bit. In fairness, I'm not sure anybody envisioned that we would have these very, very large, we sort of call them condominium projects, marijuana condominium projects occurring, but we've had 3 of them that probably have a large number of buildings on the property. And so that's why that's teed up on the work program. I want to make clear that is if ultimately it is some amendment is adopted by the board to limit the number of licenses, it does not affect the existing ones. They are legally there and grandfathered in. It would not affect those licenses, so.
Yeah, well, when the voters, I'm sorry. Can I speak?
my point to you is, looks like you have a lot of good information on your tablet. So it'd be really important that also, a copy of that goes to the Board of County Commissioners, because we will discuss and we will either approve or not approve something, but this will be done again. It's a de novo hearing or process. So the Board of County Commissioners will hear this same information, but it sounds like you have some good notes there that it'd be important for them to get that documentation.
Yeah, but when the voters approved marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, if it was on the ballot that that these people that were growing marijuana were going to ruin our farmland, you think they would have voted for it? No. No, they have had no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's permanent. Once they put concrete down and these gravel roads in, it's permanent.
Yeah, we
They've
were
destroyed
in
it.
meetings, and I thought maybe they were going to put up a building, you know, and have their indoor grow and have their outdoor grow and all that kind of stuff, you know. But these are you know, industrial building sites on top of farmland.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
testimony.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you
for
want to say
listening.
something, Commissioner?
I was just going to
Thank you for listening.
clarify a question that I probably know the answer to, which is I am assuming that based on your testimony, you all are very much in support of us having an item on the work plan that would look at limitations of the number of businesses on marijuana grows. Yes.
Exactly.
Thank you for that
Exactly.
input.
Well, you know,
Like you
even,
said, it's grandfathered in at this location. However, if there are other locations that they're thinking about doing it on, we got to save Clackamas County.
and they're showing disrespect for their neighbors. They're putting industrial, you know, you'd have a nice place out in the country, you've been out there for 35, 40 years, you know, and all of a sudden they come in and they make this big 6-foot-high berm and put these big warehouses right alongside of your property, and they're bringing all kinds of traffic and, you know, crime out into your
Thank
area.
you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
expressing your
Thank you.
concerns. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you.
This is helpful. Thank you.
And now next, Amona Greason and Sylvia Handress. Here it is, tree program.
Thank you for having us tonight. I am Sylvia Handress, my husband, Theodore Handress. We live on 13455 South Leland Road. We do support limitations. I think the government has said that now, and I think it's about time. This is an example of what can go wrong. This is our home. This is where we live, and this is what we see 24/7. Hold it up so they can see it. It's on 4 acres. We live on a rural residential. The house next to us is rural residential. There's a farm on the other side. Their home is right up against it, 10 feet from our
You can bring the picture over.
Lay it down.
oh, you want to put it in front there, Ted.
No, right.
Oh, and then
There you go.
it'll project up.
And I have to.
Turn it around. It's upside down.
Turn around.
Sorry.
Turn the picture.
Is it upside down?
The picture needs to
Oh, turn it around, Ted.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
It's all right.
That's good.
And we have, I have to say that the neighbors have been pretty decent. We have heard horror stories. Only once, we had one of the workers when we first started. He came up and he was laughing because we were watching the building. And he said he had a handgun and shot it on the ground. And my husband looked at me, he says, is that what you think it is? I said, it is, and I will not be intimidated. I will not live in fear next to this. And this is what we had. We started with, they told us it would be 35,000 square feet. Last April, they've built the new buildings on the back side there within 3 weeks. I have to commend them. It was very good. And then in of August of that same year, they filed for an amendment to those buildings. And we filed a petition, we filed a complaint, and we were told that, oh, they are pre-existing buildings and, you know, they fall into the pattern. I said, excuse me, these were built back in April without any forewarning. And then they know how to manipulate. And I have to commend them for that. They know how to manipulate the system. they built the greenhouse without cover. This was an outdoor grow all summer long. We complained about it. We smelled it. And nothing was done. Now they covered it with viscreen, but the ends are open. They're going to put more, I'm sure. They're dragging their feet. They're going to put more plants for next year. My garden is right 20 feet from that, and I have to smell it. Unfortunately, I can't take it. And I said, what do I do, Ted? I have to wear a gas mask? Is this what why our life has become? So restrictions need to be done, yes. And we in Oregon now are, as you can see, Sessions has put the red flag on. It's too much. It's way out of proportion. Not only because it's a commodity, and if you look at the commodities game, there's too much, and the value of marijuana has now fallen by half. The people are now going toward the market. Why? Because they have to pay for the taxes that the county and the state has put on them, and they're going to raise the price again for marijuana, and people can't afford it. So what's going to happen? They're going to go to the black market. And yet you say, well, you know, if we regulate it so we have a more pure product. Granted, but if it's too expensive, people aren't going to go there. So we are now in circles, running in circles, and it's interesting to see. If you know, the marijuana supporters say, well, it's just like raising tomatoes and just like raising lavender. Excuse me, but since when has tomatoes and lavender been in the black market? I'm just telling the people of this county, the opt-out has to be eliminated. The people here now are waking up. They're getting educated. There was a flowing stream from fall to winter. They've dammed it up. They put berms, they put dry wells, and they have put propane tanks and 3 large transformers, which my husband worked for PG as a substation. He was a foreman for the substation. What is it? Regional foreman, weren't you? And he tried to give his interpretation of what can happen. There's going to be erosion. And what's going to happen, we don't want to know. We are so afraid of this. I have gone and talked to the Fire Bureau. I said, what's going to happen?
Letting us know about, definitely understand that it is a
Yeah,
real
it's
concern
an
having
issue,
these
and it's an
there.
issue. And
What are
it's,
some of the, do you have some ideas about things you'd like to see changed? Obviously, eliminating it's your goal, but what about?
yeah,
more?
eliminating the opt-out would be, the idea is that there's so much knowledge with where we could have gone and we tried to give the county an overview of what could have happened. What can happen? This is too big for the area, way too big. It should have been smaller. And it runs from one end, 10 feet from our end to 10 feet to the other end. And they have a potential of adding more buildings toward the back.
Okay.
The fans we are keeping track of the noise level. On the other side of the one of the buildings, the fans went on, and the neighbor has documented that they were over 70 decibels. 50 is what is allowable. We wanted it in the beginning for 30. So these things are way too big. There's no filtration on these greenhouses. Now they're putting in more. Now with these covered ones, it will be interesting to see how quiet they will be.
Have any of these things been brought back to the county?
Oh, we have been going back and forth
okay,
and back and
times.
forth. And all we ask, accountability, responsibility. This was way too big. These people knew exactly what they wanted to do from the beginning. And this is what we're hoping in the future with
Okay.
more regulation.
Thank you. It sounds like you
Thank
definitely have
you.
some more things to get addressed here.
Uh-huh.
I'll just add, thank you both for your comments. I share many of your concerns. I would urge you, if you haven't already, to talk to your state reps as well. about
Oh,
some of
we've
this.
gone.
Right, because,
Yeah.
you know, I think unfortunately, we anticipated some of these issues because our hands are tied by the state law on EFU land. There was only, there are a lot of limitations that we could put on other parcels that we couldn't put on EFU land because of the state law. So I would encourage you to share your concerns with your state reps. And also I encourage you, you know, things like blocking flowing streams and whatnot. There are other state agencies like the DEQ that if you haven't talked to them, I would encourage you to, because there may be some issues there that some of the state agencies could remedy as well as the
Yes,
county.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ammonia Greason? Okay, Greason.
I probably wrote super sloppy.
Thank you. And then Mark Steeder? Okay.
Maybe
Well, if
Mark
you-
isn't
if-
here.
Is Mark here? Yes, he is. Yeah, would you please come to the mic so we can start to, want to make sure we're going through the time here efficiently. Thank you. Okay, and if you choose to remain anonymous, I guess you can, or please state your name and your address for the record.
Amanda Grasson. I live at 18004 Southeast Blanton in Jennings Lodge. I am here advocating for the Heritage Tree Program. I did speak last week, so I'll keep it at a very minimum. I just came with more specifics regarding the program itself and action items that the county could potentially take for that. I'm an architect that sits on the Clackamas County Historic Review Board, so I feel like I have a little different perspective on the Heritage Tree Program. And I essentially I'm requesting that it be revitalized and looked at for becoming a more valid program, because currently it's more of a feel-good program. And after looking at City of Portland and their Heritage Tree Program, it seems that there's some opportunities that Clackamas County can take to actually make it or have it become more viable. So I'll just list those items I provided, or I did PDF and send a packet that you can review, specifically in regards to, it includes all the action items. It also includes references to City of Portland's Heritage Tree Program. It also includes some zoning codes that can be looked at and to help assist with decision-making and hopefully making your lives a little bit easier. I'm
Oh,
trying
thank
to
you
do
for-
that. So, okay. So the 5 items that I would like to suggest, one being provide direct protection for trees by indicating it is unlawful to remove heritage trees once they are identified and established. The City of Portland does this, and there's more information that you can review that as to how that's done. Number 2, that Clackamas County establish a Heritage Tree Volunteer Committee. This is a way for the City of Portland to offset some of the county time and resources that would be required to run this program. Number 3 is that integrate the Heritage Tree Program protection language into the Clackamas County Zoning and Development Ordinance, Section 1002, protection of natural features. Number 4 is protection of trees during construction and tree inspection. Actually provide guidelines as to those specific requirements. Also found within the appendix of the document I provided. Number 5 is include language in the building permit application checklist for commercial and residential projects. Currently, you don't have to or from what I see, you currently cannot, or you're not required to identify directly what trees are there And so that might be something that could be considered as well. And I think it would just be an additional opportunity to double check and make sure there is not a heritage tree on site. So those are the requests specifically for that. And then I've been speaking with the Historic Review Board, as well as Oak Lodge History Detectives and some of those community groups. And I do have members on board that are interested in seeing the revitalization of that program, and hoping that we will see support from the county as well. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing those good points.
I have a question.
Well, I have a comment, not a question. But I remember before when somebody had come and talked about the trees there, that one thing that people tend to forget about is that trees absorb water in the ground. And so when we take out all these trees, then we start to have more runoff and issues. So I think that could also be something that that people address and look at.
Agreed.
I've got some very large trees on my property. What constitutes a heritage tree?
So currently, Clackamas County views that, and I do have, so just to give perspective on Clackamas County versus like City of Portland is its own thing, and we don't have to completely
Could you
become the
please
City
make
of
it
Portland.
concise here?
Sure. So what, essentially, it's either the specimen of the tree, whether it's the size or the rarity of it. If it has a historic reference associated with it. So, for instance, Historic Review Board, we had a property that there were 2 trees included in a historic
Sounds like
report.
it'll take a long time to talk about the life of these trees, so we don't have that tonight, fortunately. But thank you very much for it all. Do you have
If I could
another?
just make one comment.
Thank you.
So
Take a
we have an agenda, on the proposed work plan is an audit of some of our zoning ordinance, which doesn't necessarily include a review of the heritage tree program, but it doesn't necessarily prevent it either. So I'm pretty sure
right.
that's going to be on the work plan.
Okay.
And I would encourage you as we move forward to continue this conversation with us and with county commissioners and whatnot. It's all about building the political support necessary to bring that into the audit if
Okay.
that's desirable. So
Okay.
just, realistically, that's probably the outcome that we're going to see today is that audit will be on the work plan, and it creates an opportunity for you to continue advocating for that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay. Mark, you're up. And then could you also have a Ted come up, please? Just got a Ted in the background. Don't have his last name. Is there a Ted that wants to speak too? No? Okay, how about a Steve? Grabsker?
We
Graper?
got a Steve.
Okay, we got a Steve, all right.
Okay, so Mark, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark, thanks.
Perfect. Got 2 rhododendron people here. Now,
Good.
also we bring a lot of trees to you.
Okay.
Heritage tree.
Big trees.
Big trees, big trees. So I guess just as a way of introduction, my firm basically works on community planning and design work throughout Oregon. We've worked in 58 cities in Oregon, and 57 of them are not Portland. So we've been very pleased to have the opportunity to provide basically professional assistance to rhododendron as they formed what became known as very quickly as Rhody Rising, which has been a nice moniker that's generated a lot of community building support, enthusiasm, energy, somewhere near $10,000 of contributions, all of them being small contributions, but nevertheless adding up, help pay for me, among others. And so I think I'd originally intended to be here and provided a support letter for a community plan being put on the county work plan, but I think you've just kind of manipulated slid around that in a different way by supporting the application of rhododendron, or looking at how they can get on the ODOT TGM program or the quick response program and start to solve some of the highway safety and connectivity issues. So I think you've already done that. Those are very important and probably the generating issues that started the whole Roadie Rising movement. There's a lot more to it than that, and they'll be moving in those directions too. So I guess all I've got to say is it's great that you're supporting moving forward in that way, and I would hope that you'd support other efforts in rhododendron as well, and that whether they move ahead with the TGM program or the quick response program, or for some reason can't or are rejected, that they would come right back to you and you'd again support the kinds of things that can make rhododendron a true community, as it has been, should be, and will be in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I up?
Yes.
I'm up. Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Steve Graper, and I'm Chair of the Rhododendron CPO. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and to see a full contingent of planning commissioners here this evening. I, like the majority of you, was unable to be here on the 12th, so I relished the opportunity to have this moved forward and am able to speak to you tonight. I had this oratorical diatribe all prepared to
Save us.
What's that?
Save us.
Yeah. To get you guys to reconsider the fact that DTD had recommended that the rhododendron project not be moved forward until I received Karen's memo, Ms. Buerig's memo, stating that staff has reconsidered. So that kind of took the wind out of my sails, and this great oratorical diatribe that I had has kind of gone by the wayside. So I'm winging it tonight. But I do want to say that I watched the proceedings of the 12th on video with great interest, to watch Michelle Lamoureux and Melanie Farnsworth. Melanie was here again tonight to testify, but when you said that you didn't want to hear the same thing over, she says, I don't need to be here. They've heard it. It's in testimony, and I'm going to go home and be with the kids. So Michelle Lamoureux is with is a grandparent, so she's home with the kids. But I was in Cabo, so now I'm here and I'm able to to address you. And Mr. Pasco, you handled yourself very well and the meeting very well. You are to be commended. If I didn't think it was politically incorrect and you'd probably hit me, I'd come up and hug you because of the the way that you supported the rhododendron issue. The fact, Mr. Fitz, you brought up why are we here again since the bike ped plan was brought, and I testified before you, about 16 months ago when the bike ped plan was coming before you and then to the BCC, and it was adopted. Mm-hmm. That bike ped plan was just the beginning. It was conceptual, just as Mike had alluded to, that, a lot of the stuff that comes to you guys is conceptual. We are moving from concept to actually trying to design something. And there's a huge disconnect. And Brian, I think you saw the disconnect, and you mentioned that you saw my letter, and I think you could hear the frustration that we are witnessing. I'm not a planner. I hired a planner, but I'm not a planner. I run a meeting and I try to get people interested. When the bike ped plan was initiated, I said, great, let's ride the coattails and let's see what we can do for rhododendron. And so we started this Roadie Rising campaign, and it was a grassroots effort. And as has been alluded to, we've gotten about $10,000 in grassroots money. That doesn't go very far when you're trying to plan a community or when you're trying to design something. we went after a TGM grant and we were flatly turned down because we're not a governmental agency. They said, you need to be a governmental agency. I said, how do I become a governmental agency? Well, you need to get Clackamas County on board. Early on, and this is all in on my letter, we had a strategic planning committee meeting where we had ODOT come to the table, we had the Mount Hood Transportation Alliance come to the table, we had the Rhodey Rising Committee to the table, we had Mount Hood National Forest and the fire department all, but Clackamas County was not at that meeting. And they didn't have the funding to be able to send people, you know, all the way up the mountain to do this. And Gail Curtis from ODOT said, the only way you can move forward is if you get Clackamas County on board. And I said, how do you do that? We get on the work plan. And to a department, and here is the disconnect, because Clackamas County is a classic example of the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, because to a department, when I go to various different departments and say, hey, how can we move this forward? Oh, you need to get on the work plan. Oh, you need to get on the work plan. Even the DTD department said, you need to get on the work plan. And so, not being a planner, not knowing planning speak, I said, okay, how do I get on the work plan? And when Ms. Gonzalez sent us the offer in September, October of last year to get on the work plan, I said, okay, we want to get on the work plan. And I wrote, and then they asked me to kind of highlight, well, what is our specific ask? Well, my specific ask is to get on the work plan. We need Clackamas County's help to be able to move forward. And that's why we asked to be on the work plan. So, Mr. Fitz, you asked earlier tonight, you know, why are we rehashing this? We're rehashing it simply because that's what I'm told I was supposed to do. And I want to do everything by the book. I don't want to piss anybody off, and I don't want to step on any toes, and I want to dot my I's and cross my T's and make sure that we work within the system. But the labyrinth that is county bureaucracy and trying to negotiate that labyrinth is very, very difficult.
Yes, and that was something that we definitely understand how complex it can become. And
So,
what we've realized here tonight is also looking at the marijuana piece. Everybody thought that would be very simple to manage, but now it's becoming much more complex.
Sure.
And that's
sure.
part of the reason all
understandable.
these layers have been put in, and it takes a lot of dedication to make them go forward. And it's really appreciated that you're continuing to
And
on
Mr.
this
Dentlaw,
effort.
thank you. I do want to finish up because I know I'm in my 3 minutes and it's a long night and you guys want to go home and so do I. May I say that I highly recommend that you now take the staff recommendation into consideration and put it on the work plan and move it forward for rhododendron so that we can go into the next phase, which is, you know, the bike ped plan is conception. We want to go from conception to kind of a design, what the community wants, and then from that, working with ODOT, what can we work with within ODOT? And that multi-jurisdictional labyrinth, again, is going to be difficult, and we need Clackamas County support to be able to do that.
Okay.
Thank you very
Well,
much for
thank
your
you.
time.
Appreciate it.
Steve, I appreciate the accolades, but when you go home tonight, I hope that you will share with Karen and Michelle that they're the ones that really deserve the credit for all of this, right?
Oh,
It
for
was
sure.
a perfect example of people from a community coming here, starting a discussion, which led to a discussion with staff, and I'm very pleased that we're able to get a good outcome, so.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Melanie Farnsworth and Andrea
left.
Warnick.
Barely left.
Everybody else? Andrea Warnick left us? Oh, okay,
It's just-
all right.
I am by myself.
So you could state your name and address if you like, or no address if you prefer not to share your address.
Okay.
There you
My name is Andrea Warnock, and my address is 1023 Northwest 2nd Avenue, Canby. Good evening. My name is Andrea Warnock, and I'm a new member of the Canby Traffic Safety Commission, as well as the treasurer for my homeowners association. On behalf of the Yorkfield Homeowners Association, I would like to express our concerns pertaining to the Arndt Road Extension Goal Exception proposed in the work plan for the county's land use and transportation planning staff for 2018-2019. While we understand the need for this proposal and some of the positive outcomes, we feel as though the negative outcomes exceed the number of positive outcomes for this project, to include construction and truck noise, railroad crossing noise, traffic concerns on Northwest 3rd and Cedar flowing into downtown Canby, truck traffic concerns on 13th Avenue, safety concerns for the skate park located in the designated area of land use, and also the negative impact on wildlife in the area between the Canby Police Station and our neighborhood. Our first concern, noise. We believe that the additional truck and car noise would contribute to noise blight, especially during peak traffic hours. Since there is a hill on both sides of the railroad, we believe that between the braking and accelerating of commercial trucks and commuter traffic, the noise would echo exponentially throughout our neighborhood. Our other noise complaint would be from an additional railroad crossing. If the plan is to build some kind of overpass to avoid the railway, we are against that as well. If an overpass is the plan, we believe that it will be an eyesore and our concerns about noise will still be the same, minus the obvious railroad crossing noise. One of our biggest concerns about the noise this project would create is how it would adversely affect our property values. We have 136 properties located in our neighborhood. Our second concern is traffic. We are deeply concerned with the amount of traffic this corridor would create in our immediate area and also other areas of Canby. For example, the traffic that would be heading into town via Northwest 3rd Avenue. The intersection of Northwest 3rd and Cedar is already an issue. Northwest 3rd has a weird jut in it, meaning the intersection at Cedar requires drivers to zigzag over to continue. Also, we wonder how you would plan to address the Canby Police exiting their station. Would there be a traffic light or a four-way stop? And our next traffic concern is for Berg Street that becomes Southwest 13th Avenue and then Southeast 13th Avenue. We believe that more trucks would travel down 13th Avenue to reach the industrial parks at the north side of our town. 13th Avenue is already a traffic concern for the city of Canby's residents. There are 2 school zones located on 13th Avenue, and we believe the additional trucks would contribute to more traffic during peak travel times. And the amount of noise is also a concern for the neighborhoods in that area. Our third concern is the skate park. There's a skate park located across from the industrial area and police station. Our concerns are for the safety of those who use that facility. We also worry that the skate park would be removed for this project. We believe that the skate park is important to our community due to the fact that there are no other place in Canby that this type of activity can take place. We believe that the loss of the skate park would be devastating for our youth and our skating enthusiast adults. Our fourth concern, our last concern, is our wildlife impact. We are deeply concerned about the impact this project would have on the wildlife habitat in the area west between our neighborhood and the police station. This overflow pond area and field are comprised of already established and thriving ecosystems. There are many deer that can be observed almost daily in this area. Many species of birds nest and frequent the overflow pond as well. We have even observed some bald eagles in the past few years. We believe that this project would be a significant loss of habitat for these birds and other species. We feel as though we have expressed some of our most important concerns in this letter. We also understand that there are some positive outcomes concerning this project. However, we believe that this proposal has many negative outcomes that outweigh the positive possibilities of the Arndt Road extension over the Molalla River. Thank you, Clackamas County Planning Commission and other pertinent parties for providing an opportunity for residents to express their serious concerns over this project. We appreciate all of your hard work and dedication to the community of Canby and all of Clackamas County. Sincerely, Andrea Warnock, Yorkfield Homeowners Association.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all that.
Tried to go as fast as I could. There's a lot of facts in there.
You did good.
Very good job. Thank you. Yeah, and that one, it's a project that is not yet going forward there. The main goal there is to try to find some access from I-5 to Canby.
Yes.
And I guess this is one that they've said, well, to move this idea forward, we got to start looking at what options we have out there.
Oh, yes.
Is it gonna be option A, B, or C? And they have to start somewhere to look at all these, and really appreciate you bringing forth all the very critical pieces that they need to be considering as this
Yes.
planning moves forward. Where it'll happen, I don't know that it's gonna be determined yet, but they have to continue to do this research so things do develop. So
Okay.
I think that's some very good information that you provided.
And I think it's really important that you are paying attention and involved for your community, because your community would be the perfect person to be involved in the feasibility, to say, this wouldn't work where we're doing it, but possibly another suggestion.
Okay.
Because we certainly don't want to cause an impact onto your community, but as you see, there's a definite need for more
Oh,
movement. so-
Absolutely. Absolutely. We understand that.
So stay tuned.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. Okay.
Honestly, the testimony is, thank you, but I'm just, it's made me realize that I don't understand this project very well. I'm sitting here looking at the map, and are we talking about an extension of Arn Road on the east side of Barlow over the river toward Canby? Where is this exactly at?
Yes.
And so it's not about necessarily looking for different alternatives. It's like, there's a proposal that we're exploring, right?
So currently, within our plan, we have an extension. There is a planned extension of Art Road, which went through getting a goal exception back in the 90s.
Oh.
And that particular alignment does not cross the Malala River. Instead, it goes east and then goes south under the railroad track and traverses through Canby Ford. Okay? But there are some concerns about that particular alignment. So what this project would be doing would be to see if we could get a different goal exception, and we would be looking at alignments. Excuse me?
No.
Oh, sorry. Jeez, chatting. We would be looking, but we would be looking at, so we would be looking at the alignment that we already have, and would be looking to see if we could get a goal exception for a different alignment. And each of these alignments have different strengths and different weaknesses. So there would be a public process related to this particular, so this project would be a public process that would be doing the work needed to get a goal exception. So there would be opportunity for involvement and hearing from the public, and then decisions about whether or not that goal exception should be made. So it would be that process upon which people would be able to come in and talk, and we would have public meetings and discuss that proposal and understand, be able to look very clearly at what the different options are and weigh the positives and negatives in that.
Do you know what goal or goals the exception would need to be for?
What's that?
What goal or
goals they
goals
would
the
be.
exception?
It's a goal 3 exception. So Darcy's going to see if she can pull up a map. There was a goal exception done, and again, I think it was late 90s. And it did extend Arndt Road. It was a new road. That's why a goal exception required all through agricultural land. And it extended from Arndt Road towards the Malala River, took a right-hand turn, crossed under the railroad tracks that parallel Highway 99E. There was above-grade trestle, went under the trestle and joined up 99E on the rural side of the Malala River, so outside the city of Canby. And as part of that goal exception, that crossing, a couple things happened, is that crossing under the railroad became very difficult and to achieve that. And there was concerns with impacts to the business, that it would go through the middle of Canby Ford at that time. So the idea was, it's in a rural reserve now, in which you can't build new roads in rural reserves, even with a goal exception. And what we did is the county was successful in amending the administrative rule to say where you have an existing exception and you're just modifying that in a rural reserve, there's a process to do that. And the idea is to look at alternative locations to cross the Malala River into the city of Canby. Let's see if Darcy can pull a map up here for that. And that would be a joint county, city application, public process, evaluating alternatives, feasibility of it, impacts of the road, correct alignments, all those sort of things.
So, just, it seems that, this was contemplated well over 2 decades ago.
Yes.
And now we're talking about an additional crossing on top of the crossings that are already there. Are we going back at all and exploring how to, whether there are existing roads that can be bolstered to achieve a similar thing? Or is that part of this process, or are we focused solely on a new crossing at Arndt Road? I mean, are we sure 20 years after the fact that this is still the best approach?
So,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, well, as a part of our transportation system plan update, there was a look at the transportation system plan then. And so we know that we need a connection. We also know, and so we were able to pull the map up on the on your screen. And so it's the dashed line that we're talking about. And the red line to the north is Knights Bridge. That's the other kind of access, and that one of the issues related to that particular access is that it also goes through neighborhoods, and it's part of the reason why we're looking for this new connection. There aren't many roads out there to make connections. There were particular issues that had come up during the initial study, and times have changed. So what we have done so far is done a little bit of design work to understand what the potential cost would be if we did change the alignment. Changing the alignment does make a more direct connection to the roads that serve the industrial land there in Canby. But again, this particular project, putting it on the work program, would allow us to look at those particular issues. So that's the type of items that she brought up are the items that would be looked at during this particular process.
I just, from a broader land use perspective though, we're taking land that's been put in the rural reserve where we can't currently build roads, and we're proposing to build a giant road right through it. It does not make sense to me. On its face. I'm really struggling with that.
And there's an existing alignment now, goal exception now that exists, it's still valid. And the idea is to revisit that for some of the reasons that Karen mentioned, but also as part of the goal exception, it is looking at alternative analysis, alternative routes, future traffic capacity, all those sort of things are evaluated as part of the goal exception.
Have you ever driven that road?
And the transportation here in Portland metropolitan area is one of that needs the most attention of any transportation system across the nation. We're like number 2 as far as the most congested.
And I did also want to highlight that one of the board's goals, the Board of County Commissioners' goals, is to be able to work with Canby to provide better access for their industrial lands. So that has influenced our recommendation to put this on the work program.
I would just put out that I would feel a lot more comfortable if the language here was explore options as opposed to pursue this particular objective. Because if the goal is to pursue options, let's look at alternatives, but the way it's currently written, the only thing we're looking at is the Arndt Road exception.
I'd point out if you have, sorry.
Oh, Commissioner.
I just want to
Christine
quickly ask,
Drentz.
process, timeline, funding, like how far out is this? If you guys have it on this work plan in this upcoming year, can you talk a little bit about that, please?
So the work program item would again be doing the planning process. So we would be using a small amount of the road fund to be able to fund that planning process. Now to actually construct the bridge, so this is the difference between the plan and then actually getting something into construction. The estimated cost of doing this road would be upwards of $40 million. And so it would be a very big lift. There isn't funding identified, but in order to be able to construct a connection, we need to understand what the plan is. So after the plan or the goal exception is done, then Canby and Clackamas County would need to work together to be able to identify how it would be funded. So it is not imminent.
5
It
years
is
would
not
be the best
assured.
case?
Yes, funding is definitely not assured. It would be a very big lift.
Somewhere between 5 and 20 years before anything happens.
It took 20 years to get here, so.
Just to describe though, that road, if you're trying to get from I-5 to Canby, which right now their industrial area is blowing up, we see a lot of deliveries to Canby. That's almost a 90-degree turn, I swear to God. It is a crazy street that is very busy. And then you can either run through Barlow or through a neighborhood in Canby to get to all the industrial and commercial on the other side of 99E. We saw just a few weeks ago, Canby Sand and Gravel, all those trucks, if they're seeking to go to I-5, you know, you're talking $3 a mile, and if you're expecting them to route down 99E, that's $30 of difference. You know what I mean? So it adds up quick to realign that. You know, I would run with that goal exception while you got it. I apologize to Canby, but I'm telling you, this is better than what you might get if you take it back to the planning board, you know, take it back to the drawing board.
Do you have to stick with Arndt Road, though, or was there an opportunity to explore options? Or does the exception require that you limit the conversation to your prior plan?
There's not too many options out there.
I think that the way that the goal exception language is written, and we actually had to work with the state to look at a way that we could actually even entertain a goal exception, is to be able to have, I want to say minimal impact, but within,
Greater.
excuse me?
Was it no
No,
greater?
oh, it's no greater impact than the existing alignment. So we would need to show that. So moving it much farther away from where it's located would more likely be of more greater impact. So, but,
Costlier.
excuse me?
And costlier.
And costly.
I definitely appreciate, that was really good information as well. And so I would just reiterate, I would feel a lot, if we could word that language to be something like explore alternatives to provide access from I-5 to Canby, including the potential goal exception, that would make me feel a lot more comfortable. Provide some room for the public to advocate for other alternatives.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah, well, thank you. Okay. Guess then we're closed for any more public comments this time. And I guess at this point, then we'd like to go into further discussion between the Planning Commission and maybe Commissioner Pasco, did you want to do a recap of anything last week, or does anybody here want to share their comments, thoughts they had from last week?
So just to ask, the rhododendron, that was not going to happen last week. Now it is going to happen, because what I was getting was that it was a done deal and it was going forward, and I didn't understand why it was before us just to listen to if it was happening for sure.
But only part of it had come before us. Because
Okay.
it was a bicycle track, da-da-da-da. It really wasn't addressing the crossings and the safety issues that they have referring to, and also the access to the businesses. Okay, before it was more about the pedestrian and the bike, and the biking.
So if they didn't fight the fact that they weren't on the plan and it would never happen, it'd just be waiting around for system development charges to kick it off, or what would get a plan moving forward if we approved it? And I'm trying to understand, we plan, then there's no money for it, you know, then they ask, hey, give us resources, move something else down on the list, okay, that's occurred. What could we have done during the initial concepts, you know, when we voted for it, to make that the future, to prevent them from having to come back, you know, to
They're
these
two
meetings?
different animals.
Well, you know, sometimes I know that it would be good to think about it that, yeah, everybody would just run with that idea now. But no matter what thought comes from the public, they have to continue to pursue it all the time, because there's multiple parties that are all have different interests involved. And so that's where you always have to remain dedicated to those tasks, and that's what we've seen here. And I think we've got a lot of advocates between the county and also the Board of Commissioners here too that are saying, yes, it's good to see that we still see the support from the public, that this is what they still want. Because other times, something will come up and it'll stop very quickly after that person passes away or passes into another area or something or moves, and nobody really wants it in the community. So that's the idea about continuing to stay involved, and it does take a while.
So if we're passing a plan to make something occur, it's basically staying out there as a restriction on what that community could do because that is the plan. And it's not going forward. So I just kind of wonder, like, what could we have done to make it to where they didn't have to come back and fight?
I don't know you can. So you think about plans, and as part of that plan that we did, there was a CIP associated with it. And to actually construct the projects out, those money drives that. So we did all that planning, but those things, there's millions of dollars in that CIP.
So beyond grants or shovel-ready grants from the feds, or it's typically system development charges would push that, correct?
Not
necessarily. I mean, I think it is funding in general.
Right.
It's funding in general, and there's different types. You know, we get funding for our road system from a variety of different types. So it could be system development charges, and it could be an urban renewal district, or it could be a grant. But we have a capital improvement program that lists all of our different, you know, we have 20 years, so those are all of the projects that we would like to build. But then we have a 5-year capital improvement program that basically says these are the projects that we are going to build. And we have very little flexibility in what goes into that because the majority of our road fund goes for maintenance.
Yeah.
So in order to get into, I'm going to build this, you really need to match it to a funding source.
But these are sidewalks. This is a
Yes.
fundamental community thing that they're paying system development charges for, right?
Yeah.
No.
I think the system development charges are actually for a variety of different things.
Well, I know they're for a variety, but the community's putting in money for improvements, and there's no, so basically, when we pass plans, they're just hopes. They're like the Art Road alignment, a bunch of money spent to get it ready to go, and then it just waits for somebody in the county system to prioritize that. And the squeaky wheel gets, the money.
It's private and public
but if-
development.
It isn't necessarily just the squeaky wheel. It's usually, it typically is the appropriate funding source becomes available at the right time. And also it is the need and urgency, right? When a system achieves failure. But we have over 300 different projects on our plan. So there's a lot of sidewalks that are missing out there.
And I think it's important to maybe divorce this a little bit from the transportation plan that came before us, because it's not really what, you know, this is not the first example of plans that we have recommended to the BCC that we know probably will never be funded, maybe in any of our lifetimes, right? But the issue here was that people from Rhododendron saw some very specific safety needs that they want fixed in their community that are part and parcel of that plan to some extent. And they were trying to figure out how to move those specific projects forward. They are hitting a wall with ODOT. And I think we've found a good solution to help for the county staff to help them find some money and find a path forward for some projects that are important to that community and will bring some more safety to that community. So it's not really about the overall plan and making that plan happen. It was identifying some specific pieces that were important to that community to figure out how to move those forward.
When someone pulls a permit on this over a certain size, though, they are required to put in sidewalks. It is happening over time as development occurs, just like any other. All right. So it just hasn't happened in the last 20 years like they've wanted.
Or 40.
It probably hasn't been too many new buildings downtown.
I'll just make a couple final comments. You know, you have this great sheet of all the projects with recommendations and a revised recommendation regarding the Rhodey project. And as you move through that, so for those of you that weren't, you know, at the first meeting, there's a list of all the other projects that we heard and county's staff's response to those, including some projects that really aren't planning related projects. They'd be something done by another department or through another venue. So just let you know they're all out there, so you have a list of all of them as you begin your discussion about how to move that and prioritize those projects.
I'd like to bring up one of them, and that's the NRD. And I watched the last hearing we had, or the last meeting we had, And I was also concerned with that issue because with zoning, the way that we're talking about small manufacturing, technically even a bakery is a problem because they're taking raw goods, putting them together, producing a product, and then selling them. And I don't really consider that manufacturing, just like in such as like a brewery. That was the example that the young man brought up. I say young man because he's younger than I am. But I think that those are problems. And I can also see those problems in Westland. And we're working on our zoning right now, or our codes right now, because we are stifling business from being able to come in. And it sounded like a lot of the community there wanted some of these businesses, and yet the door is being shut in their face because they're technically falling under manufacturing. So I was hoping to see that we could do something with that more than what we have right here, because it's on the waiting list, but not anywhere to be addressed.
That's at the board's, at the commission's discretion, if you want to add that in place of another work item.
Okay.
The other thing, just last final comment, the table also talks a little bit about how we prioritize these based on some strategic goals, some things are required by law to do, et cetera, et cetera. I also want to point out is, I think overall if you look through the list, it's a pretty good mix of urban and rural projects, which we try to keep that in mind, so it's not all just urban and it's not all rural. The land use projects, really there's about half and half of them are urban and rural, or they're in both. They affect both urban and rural areas, and same thing with transportation projects. So we still continue to try and be cognizant of doing work inside and outside the urban areas, recognizing those, sort of changing perceptions and paying attention, particularly things that happen out in the rural areas of the county.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I think it would be good for, well, what I'd like to do is with
I do have one more question for
well-
staff before we do.
Okay. Is it
Board
about one of the
commission.
projects here?
It's about one of the projects and it's based on one of the public comments.
Okay, so I was gonna go through these and then we can address that at that time. Is it one of the items on this
It's
document?
one of the,
Okay, because what I wanted to
Heritage
first
tree
do
ones.
is if we can go through the planning projects, us collectively, get that, and then we'll go through the next section, and we can bring up your comments at that time. And then we'll be through this whole package, so we're not gonna be bouncing around back and forth. It would be an approach here, I think, would be, help us get it all wrapped up.
Let's let Mary ask her question, but I would encourage us to think about, maybe we could just take a straw poll of where people are at, because we may not necessarily need to walk through every one of these projects.
I'm not planning on walking through
Yeah,
every one.
okay.
It's just, we're looking at green and blue right now, and that's it.
okay. Well, my question's related to green, so it's at the beginning.
Okay.
I was looking at the materials that were provided to us for the heritage trees and the existing program now. It looks like one of the reasons that it's not active is because there's no longer an arborist on call or on staff to verify the status of those trees. Is that the primary reason? Are there other reasons? And is that something that could be remedied by just allowing to have an applicant for a heritage tree provide their own certified arborist study for that tree?
So good question. So just for context, the county had a heritage tree program actually from about 2008 to about 2016. And it wasn't regulatory. It was voluntary, where a property owner could come and say, hey, I want to nominate my tree as a heritage tree. We had an arborist and some folks that would look at that and evaluate that. And if it was nominated as a heritage tree, then again, it wasn't a regulatory standard. We provided a plaque to be put on the tree. It was put on our county webpage. Our Board of County Commissioners meet once a year and do a little celebration and sort of notice the heritage trees that were nominated. But it was not regulatory in any way, shape, or form. It did not prevent the tree from being cut down. Although I think in most folks, if they nominated their tree, they weren't going to cut it down. And what happened is a couple things over time. One, in the last year or two, we got little or no nominations. People wouldn't nominate trees. And I think in the last year or two, We got 0 or 1 person that actually did it. So there wasn't interest in doing it. And yes, and then our arborist retired about 2 years ago, which provided that sort of expertise. So it was a combination of the fact that interest waned significantly, and we just had no interest in continuing with people not nominating their trees. Second of all, it wasn't regulatory, and if it was to be regulatory, it's a tree cutting ordinance is what it is. The county did a tree cutting ordinance, I think 2010 or so. It was controversial, to say the least. We spent a year with committees. Excuse me. We spent a year with committees looking at the tree cutting ordinance. There was no consensus after a year. We brought some ordinance amendments in front of the board. It was extremely controversial. There was half the people that showed up in favor of tree cutting and half the people not in favor of regulating it. Very, very, very controversial. And the board ended up with some middle ground about trying to preserve the trees where we can, looking at designs, those sort of things, and putting some emphasis on trying to do that in the design process. At the same time, the board also said we don't want to prohibit somebody from meeting minimum densities on their property. So that's how we were evaluating the development process now. And so if it was moving towards a heritage tree program that's regulatory, it is a significant undertaking that will get significant attention.
Okay, can you relate that to the other not recommended items, the tree canopy preservation item, NRE, and improved natural resource area protections, NRF? Because it seems like those sorts of protections could go hand in hand on a future item.
They could, yeah. So part of the things we'll be looking at in the audit, though, is generally, again, we're not doing wholesale policy changes, but we are looking at our tree cutting and other natural, sort of our natural environment sections of the code. And we will be looking at those sort of things. Again, I don't anticipate that we would move into talking about significant changes to our tree cutting regulations, but looking at it from a general cleanup and things that we can do. The other thing that I think we have to be very careful of with is some case law and about clear and objective standards for subdivisions. And there's some standards in law, and there's some court cases that have come out from other cities that basically would it would sort of make it, county has to be very clear, and we may be moving towards clear and objective standards to all our subdivision and partition applications. And that means you can't have discretionary standards. And there's some case law and some things embedded in state law that direct those. So part of that conversation is if we get into some things that regulate tree cutting, they have to be clear and objective. It would mean what can you cut and what can you not cut, and what is a mitigation standard, and it would have to be very clear. And it's a significant task to do that.
Okay, so it does sound like it's more complex and regulatory than item L1 for the ZDO audit. But again, for the NRE and NRF, tree canopy preservation and natural resource area, is that something that could be looked at
Yes,
in combination
certainly.
in
Yeah.
the next year's work plan, since these were not on this year's?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then, with that, I'd like to go into the planning items here. Myself, I have, out of the 7 items, I have a comment on one, on the marijuana one. Is there a way that we can bring that up to the top of the list so your resources will be committed to that? Because I think there's a real time-sensitive item on the marijuana, because like you mentioned, people get grandfathered in, and the sooner that we can address that, it would be better, I think, for the public to have that reviewed. What is your current time frame to maybe work through that piece and get it in front of us and get it implemented? What would be your best case scenario?
You can certainly recommend that in terms of some priority. If you decide to do that, that it be moved on the agenda, you know, on the program earlier rather than later. Remember, these will go from July 1, 2017 through June 30th, so they're year projects. You could certainly recommend it. My guess is the board may have a similar position to do that sooner rather than later. So that's certainly acceptable. I would say the other, and part of this is, if the work program's adopted, is to look at sort of the staffing, the resources that we have, who's going to do the project, and figure out when we do them and how we tee those up. One of the other things that will probably rise to the top very quickly is the accessory dwelling units inside the urban growth boundaries, because by the bill that was passed by the legislature, it makes it effective July 1, 2018, is before the work program season even starts. But we may be moving that forward because it becomes effective July 1.
Okay,
So
thank
the
you.
answer is yes, we could certainly,
Okay.
you could
we
certainly include that in
Definitely
the
know my
recommendation.
thoughts on that. Commissioner Fitz?
When we had the commissioners, the county commissioners here a few months back, Jim Bernard requested we didn't touch marijuana for a few years. You remember that? I would request that we ask for advisement if we should take that up by the commission, given that we were given that directive by him as the chair.
He can't give us direction. We're independent of them. We give recommendations to them, and what they do is their own decision.
For us,
So that's where we can listen to them objectively, and that's where it stops.
well, if we're going to serve it up and then it's going to be ignored and not put on the agenda by the chair of the county, I'm just saying we should just ask, is this something where we're aligned rather than put in that much more work?
Okay. Thanks for the comment.
Just a point of clarification. I mean, these are not in any type of priority order, right? And it's not like anything's going to happen one at a time. That's why they've got it divided up by FTE.
Mhm.
We've got a whole contingency of staff with resources allocated to move them along as efficiently as they. So I don't think it makes sense for us to start ranking these at all. I think this is this year's work plan, and they have a FTE set aside to make sure that those things happen in the most efficient way we can make them happen, right?
Well, actually, if you put one project in the lead, then you can put two people on that project and get it done quicker. That's where it is right now, where you have 1/4 of a person for a whole year. So that's the idea of trying to put it in the front end of the workload. And yes, it is part of the overall year package, but that's the way when you build a construction project, you put your resources on your tasks that you need complete first. And then the resources are the controlling piece that get things done.
Yeah,
So
but-
that's why we have to help
I
them.
hope you, and I
move
hope you
forward.
let me do that. I can appreciate prioritizing things, but I hope you let me do that. And most of these projects will include multiple staff.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Does anybody else have any other comments on the planning items here? Okay.
Well, I have a question, Mike. If NRD can be considered very important to be addressed, how would that get pushed up?
If, in our what?
NRD, enable the small-scale manufacturing?
It would require you prioritizing that in place of one of the other recommended projects. Or we consider it on a future work program.
Okay.
The public comment we received on that at the last meeting was requesting that it be moved up and replacing L4 short-term rentals. That was what the public comment was for.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I agreed with that because we have, if you look at the Ls, we have a couple different housing issues going on at the same time. So I think that the manufacturing is very important for economic development.
Okay.
Excuse me, if we're going to have a conversation about, are we having a conversation about the ones that were not recommended by staff? Are we having a conversation about the ones that are? Where are we at right now for process?
I'm moving into transportation, but this got sidebarred here on something, so we're into transportation right now. We went
Okay.
through the land use, the green, now we're into the transportation. Then after that, we can go into these other pieces, and if somebody wants to recommend, we do some switching out. Okay, so on transportation, are there any other comments from anybody here about concerns or changes they'd like to see?
I would just echo Commissioner Pasco's comments earlier about clarifying the language for how T4 for the Arndt Road extension is described.
Yes, I agree. And so part of that was to adding alternate routes in the analysis.
We've noted that. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Can I ask a staff question before we move on? For the Canby Ferry, the bridge feasibility study, that wasn't brought up from our Canby testimony. But again, I'm curious how much feedback you've gotten from anybody in the community, because it also would assume the potential for more traffic through neighborhoods in this very rural community. And I'm wondering whether or not, it doesn't look like that was brought forward by Canby. So can you talk a little bit about the process for how that landed where it is?
So how it landed where it is that our transportation maintenance group maintains a ferry. And we have concerns about the long-term cost of maintaining that ferry. So the county is interested in understanding what the cost would be if we were to replace that ferry with a bridge. And so as a part of that feasibility, just to get an understanding of what the cost of that bridge is, as well as if it was constructed to be collect a toll, how much toll revenue could be generated. That is the purpose of the study, to be able to provide that particular information. So during that, again, would be a process upon which there would be some public engagement, but since it's not influencing a decision yet, it's just providing for information to be able to consider. The public engagement, I would anticipate a meeting or two with the public on that, to be able to provide them with information about what the project was and what we found out.
So what you're looking at is possibly changing this from OpEx to CapEx funding, and that's where you're looking at your net present value right now to see if it's going to make sense to move it out of your operations. That's the overall
I
approach.
Understood some of what you said.
Sorry.
How
And
much,
they,
how much does the
that's-
ferry cost a year? And then if you invested that in physical infrastructure instead, that's what he was saying.
Okay. It costs about $400,000 a year to maintain the ferry.
Okay.
One thing I'd like to say to speak to that is I've used that ferry for many, many years, and there are a portion of time of the year that you cannot use that ferry because either the river's too high, the river's too low, and so it really takes away the option of transportation getting over to Canby, because sometimes it is the most necessary way to go. So I would think it would help Canby if that was addressed.
Just
good
to
to
share, $100 million bridge over 30 years, amortized at 3%, is roughly $400,000 a year, just to share. Or no, excuse me, $400,000 a month. My bad. So that's the difference right there.
So
Then you have to bring that to net present
Ellen was
value.
pointing out that the $400,000 is what we lose.
That's what the loss is,
Yeah.
yes.
The loss. So
So
all right,
put that
thank you for
towards
the
a payment, and you're
clarification,
not going
Ellen.
to get very far.
And I can't remember what year it was, but that's not the ferry that we had in 1992. So that was a smaller ferry that was always breaking down. And so then they got a little bit larger ferry, which is a nice ferry, but if you can't run it because the river isn't working with you, then you've got a problem because you've made that investment and yet you can't use it.
Okay. Any other comments about the ferry? No?
Now, too.
All right. Does there anybody else have any comments or questions about the transportation?
Oh, quaint though. It's lovely.
No? All right. Then going on to the future projects, we heard that possibly moving up the small-scale manufacturing, having that move into the current planning
Yes,
projects is
yes.
what you'd propose? And which one would you think should be dropping off the list? Do you have a recommendation? of where-
Yes, I believe, what did you say that
Proposal
the?
was L4.
L4,
L4.
short-term rentals in single-family zones.
And that seems to be the really only area of contention that maybe we have, and maybe we should actually discuss that in more
Sure,
detail.
sure, because we do have two housing issues. It's L4 and L7.
Okay. So I know we need to talk about it, that one. There are other items on the list here, so we can make sure we can
I just-
try to go through them collectively. Portions to be considered as part of recommended projects. Commissioner Phillips, you brought up some good points on that.
Yeah, I just want to
And-
reiterate that it's worth looking at for not this year, but next year, looking at the tree canopy preservation, NRE, the natural resource area protections, NRF, and potentially heritage trees protections kind of together, and what we can do for our existing trees, understanding that we do need to have a more complex look at things due to the need for that clear and objective process.
My takeaway on that, for what it's worth, is that I think we have a path forward in theory to make some amendments to this, but it's not going to happen unless the advocates create some political pressure within the county commission to move it forward, right? I think that's ultimately what needs to happen. I think that's great, but I think the reality is that the advocates of the program need to get together and become more organized and create some political pressure that would then trickle down and have us amend that plan. That's the only realistic way for that to change.
Yeah, and I don't see it as the priority this year, but
Right.
perhaps the momentum could be gathered, so it could be a priority
That's
next
right.
year.
Now, Brad, I'd like to remind you that we have heard about the heritage trees and the problems in that area for at least the last 2 years.
Right.
So it's not just a recent bubbling up.
Right, and I totally agree with that. I guess my comment was more so that I think, as we heard from Mike, at one point in time, this was extremely controversial, and I think the county commission is reluctant to reopen it, but for some substantial pressure from the public to do that.
Sure.
So I think we should encourage people in the public to kind of ramp up that pressure, and hopefully it'll be back before us in a meaningful way.
Well, I'd like to remind you too that in the past, the people there in that area have felt that they're not heard because they have come over and over and over again, and they feel like nobody's listening to them. So that's a danger.
Right.
Okay. Then, I guess, then we wanted to talk about renting your home versus doing manufacturing in the home.
I support keeping the one where you can do Airbnb or whatever and not axing that. I think that's a terrible idea to take it off the work plan. I mean, it's a reality. Those are all over the place. The legislature passed legislation specifically to allow them to tax them just like other hotels and motels. There's fairness now with that industry. I can't imagine that the county would want to give up those revenues. Why wouldn't you let them take a look at this?
I'll just, with all respect to Joseph and others who testified in this, I will agree with Christine. I think, and not so much, I actually don't see this as an either or, but I also think the Airbnb stuff is moving very, very quickly, and the county needs to get on top of it. And so the timing is ripe to do that. And maybe, we really encourage folks with some of the other, with the other issue to try and finesse that a little more. And it's not that we can't do it in the future. It just means that maybe it needs a little more thought, and we'll get it on another work plan down the road.
What we'd basically be looking at is an affirmative allowance of that in the code, right? That'd be the big thing, is just basically writing that in, as opposed to right now, it doesn't really address it. It doesn't say anything either way. The state created it, so
Are you referring to the small scale manufacturing?
No, I'm talking about Airbnb, like the temporary rental type thing. I would just point out that if there isn't time, staff is turning over, and that isn't bringing forth a whole bunch of neighborhood complaints. I mean, if there's a bunch of requests for code enforcement, then yes. But if there's not complaints, I don't understand why we would take that as a priority.
I'll just add, I did want to be sure that we were discussing NRD and the small scale manufacturing as an issue. I understand that we can only prioritize so much, and I would actually agree that Airbnb is probably a little bit more urgent. However, I also think that the small scale manufacturing is very important to the communities,
Totally agree.
and that needs to be right in the wings if it can't be on the work plan.
Are we getting complaints about Airbnb?
We get complaints and pretty regular phone calls about them. Yep.
So it's your
Could you-
advice that that should be a priority because of, to straighten that out?
We're getting interest in can I do them, and folks who are complaining about their neighbors or people in the neighborhood doing them.
I think the reality is that this is going to be a pretty controversial subject,
Yep.
and it's going to take a lot of staff time to run it through the whole public hearing process and everything else. It won't be an easy decision. I think there will be arguments on both sides.
It will draw attention.
Well, the code allowance of how many stops in a neighborhood. I mean, it's more about traffic noise and appearance, right? Like, I think it's pretty straightforward, good neighborly code writing, right? If you're doing this, you're out of the line. So I think it'd be pretty easy.
So,
So what are we going to do? We have some, issues. I wonder, NRD, looks like it's not a big ask, so I don't know why we can't try, is there another avenue to address it instead of the work plan?
Not really. I don't know how much of an ask it is. Right now, in those zoning, the general commercial and community commercial zoning district, what is prohibited is sort of manufacturing, processing of raw materials. That's what's specifically prohibited. The idea, I think, is to do something like a brewery, for example, like a small brewery or the bakery or things like that. And I will say that there may be some of that allowed when it's sort of accessory to another primary use. But I think in this context, I think it will take some policy discussion about what you're going to allow and not allow. So when you say manufacturing and what is small scale, what does that mean? And it's one thing, and I'll just use a brewery because we some of the cities use them, and Estacada has, where it's a restaurant and a kind of pub and bar, and part of that is a small brewery. That seems entirely appropriate, but you probably don't want a large-scale brewery that is just a brewery in your commercial zoning district. So the idea is, what are the standards that you're going to apply for? Is there a square footage? Is it a square footage? Is it accessory to a primary use? Those sort of things. And so it does require some policy discussion to develop those.
When that's one way you can control it is by stating the square footage. Because
It's one way, yes.
Yeah,
It's
because
one way.
it is an easy way to do, or that you say that you process, but it's sold on site. So like with a bakery, you're not going to be, it's not like you're putting in a huge bread machine going out. You're talking about making something and selling it on site.
Yes.
So those are the two ways that I've seen it handled in Portland, and like I said, some of the other cities surrounding are looking at that same issue.
And that the idea is you're going to have to develop those standards.
Okay.
And can I ask one more question about this one too? Would this include marijuana in commercial zones? Can they suddenly start to do small-scale manufacturing in the back of a marijuana shop? Like, I don't get this. So I wasn't here for the whole marijuana discussion that you guys were all here for. So I'm just wondering, what are the unintended consequences of this? And who else might be drawn in that happens to be in a commercial district? I'm just trying to understand it.
I think we're highlighting how challenging this conversation.
Yeah.
It's not as easy on its face as it
Right.
seems, and would require a lot of policy discussion and a lot of staff time to do notice and whatnot. That's
Yeah.
part why it's just not
And,
quite ready.
and the answer to your question is, I wish Jennifer here because she would know what the code says. I would have to look at the zoning ordinance. I can't remember if we restricted processing of marijuana in our commercial districts. I don't know for certain.
My memory is we allowed extraction and we didn't allow it in agricultural industrial. Like it was like that was the, so, you've got the very dangerous flammable explosive one allowed. That's my memory. So, and it's very restrictive in Clackamas County to where that's highly sought and there isn't a lot of that.
Mike, for these NR items, was there an initial assessment of staff time? Because we got the FTEs for everything else.
Yeah, we don't have it on this.
I'm sorry, say that
So we
again?
got the FTEs for the recommended items, but for the NR not recommended items, was there also a kind of initial assessment of staff time or estimated staff
For the
time for
NR,
some
for
of these?
like the NRD?
Yeah.
I would say it's probably somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2.
okay. All right. Well,
Mr. Chair, are you ready for a motion?
yes, I am, and yes, I would like to make
Go ahead.
suggest recommendation that we do strongly promote the marijuana ordinance and then followed by the ADU as part of the lead pieces for the county to be working on here for the planning. Put those at the
Okay.
top of their goals. We appreciate it. That's my question, and Commissioner Holmes, did you want to add any items, or were you?
Well, first you need a second.
Well, no,
on-
I'm just talking about it in general before we get to motion.
okay.
Because I can't motion on the chair.
Well,
All right.
if it's okay,
think
I
we
will,
should go
I
to a
will make a
motion.
motion and I'll incorporate that, some of this stuff. So I would I would move approval of the draft work plan, moving the marijuana ordinance amendment and the ADU to the top of the list, replacing T6 with the modified NRA to address rhododendron, as we've discussed, and revising T4 with the alternatives language, as we discussed, to address the
Memo.
Canby.
Yeah.
And other than that, it would remain as proposed.
I'd second.
Okay, so I'd like to make a discussion on this. We've talked in the past about having, oops.
Sorry. Okay, so I will move approval of the work plan as drafted by staff, moving L3, the marijuana ordinance amendment, and L6, the accessory dwelling unit regulations for rural areas, to the top of the
Work plan.
priority list. And, you follow me, Darcy? Replacing T6 with the modified NRA that was proposed by staff to address rhododendron, and amending T4 to include the alternatives language as we've discussed, and we will trust staff to work out that wording, but I think the spirit of adding the alternative is there.
Mary?
Explore alternatives.
Yes.
Second.
Okay,
Okay,
so Darcy, can I go now?
yes, go ahead.
Just-
Commissioner
Wait,
Holmes.
wait,
With
wait.
the
I
fingers.
think- Just make sure she's got it.
I think she's good.
I think she's kidding you.
Okay, I just don't want to.
She can,
I don't wanna
she can
mess her up.
rewatch the video if she needs to. 3 times over.
So in the past, we talked about having, if we have an area of something that we don't totally agree with or want to put an emphasis on, then we should have a minority report that goes along with this passage of this motion. And I would highly suggest that for the NRD, because I know that economic development is very important, and we even have another advisory board that discusses such a thing. So I would hope that that is important to the Board of County Commissioners.
Very good point.
So-
Thank you.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
That, so there's a section on this work plan that talks about projects recommended if funding becomes available.
Okay.
And why don't we recommend that we include the NRD in that list? And if opportunity comes up through the year, there's additional staff time, that would be kind of on the priority list to explore.
I think that one's associated with transportation, because these are capital projects. where
Right,
that-
but the spirit is the same. It would be the land use section of the on deck, right?
Okay, so we'll call it land use,
So there's no,
second level.
there's no obligation by staff to pursue it, but it's signaling that it gets moved up high on the list if there's, would that make you
Essentially,
feel more comfortable?
Well, that's
Gail?
exactly
Yeah,
what the
that
minority.
would make me more comfortable, either that or I need a minority report, one or the other,
So
because I don't want it to get lost.
I will amend my motion to include moving NRD to a, are you tracking this? I'm getting the evil eye.
Okay, Brian, it'll be a minority report of the land use planning. It won't be underneath the funding for transportation.
No, it would be land use.
It'll be just
Right.
land use
It will be,
minority.
it will be similar to the transportation where we've got projects that if funding becomes available, there will be a
Funding or
land
time.
use section that says if more resources become available, we will pursue this particular goal.
That's fine.
Is there a second to that
And-
amendment?
I would second that addition to the motion.
And then, Mike, I have a question to that. So if we present something like that to the Board of County Commissioners, then they're going to realize that we're putting a lot of a weight on that we think that's very important. Otherwise, it would get lost in
I think it's
the,
probably a stronger statement than
Okay.
the minority report,
Okay.
right?
And if they decide not to do one of the other recommended projects, they could slide that
This
in.
one trickles up.
and is that something that we could also send a memo over to the Economic Development Committee so they understand that this is kind of out there floating in the stream?
Send
and
it
it's
to who?
important? the Economic Development Committee for the county.
Karina?
We could notify them, or provide them a copy of the work program.
Okay, yeah, I think that it's important that they realize that that's an element in their committee.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Are there any questions about the motion?
I think we did that.
Okay, none? Okay, well, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those,
Mary?
Are we voting on the amendment?
No,
No.
the motion.
I incorporated that amendment into my,
So we got a new motion then.
Yeah, it's in
one motion.
Ask again.
So, one more time. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. All right. Well, thank you, and I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing all the county's plans here. And that we were also able to move Rhodey up on the list. It was not in the back
Chair?
list anymore, so we got it up on the front table. So
Chair, I
that's
believe we
good.
have minutes now.
It's not on the thing, or, I have it on the
Now-
agenda.
What's that?
I believe we
We
have.
have draft.
Yes, we do
minutes.
have minutes, that is correct, yes. And we
Mr.
got them for the March 12th, and we have them for February 26th.
We'll do 26 first.
And so on February 26th, is there any questions about the minutes?
I will move approval of the February 26 minutes.
I'll second them.
Okay,
Gail
all those
seconded.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain, I was not there.
Okay. Those
No, I
are
have to
approved.
abstain. I
And
wasn't
likewise, I will move approval of the March 12th minutes.
Okay.
I'll second.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I watched the video, so I know everything that was stated in that meeting.
Video at, that was
All
sick.
right. Yeah, I'll have to defer to the video as well, but all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Okay, none. I guess motion passes. All right, so that's the meeting minutes, and do we have any other things with the schedule?
Just real quick on other business, I have an item. We have, the planning commission recruitment has closed. We got a very, very good pool of candidates. I think we had 25 or 26 applicants, which is the best recruitment we've had in a number of years, as far back as I can remember. Brian and myself and another staff person, we perused and sort of the applications. We've narrowed it to probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 candidates for interviews. We're going to try and do those in the next week or so, and that will provide a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. At this point, Brian and I and either county council or another staff are going to do the interviews and provide that recommendation. So, but happy with the candidates. Got a good diversity of professions and really a good diversity of folks geographically across the county, including some interest up the Mount Hood area, Sandy, Malino, Canby, et cetera. So very happy with the recruitment.
What's the turnover date for that?
Mike, I'm curious, we were gonna be talking about those before, so why are we not talking about them? Why are you and I not going over them?
Well, I remember we contacted you for the interviews, I think.
No,
Okay.
no.
Maybe not. Okay. So we can do that. I can't remember why. I thought I had a discussion with interest or timing of doing that, but we certainly can do that. Or maybe then the 3 of us.
Okay.
Okay.
Just trying to find out what the thinking was here.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I thought we vetted that, but I don't remember. It was timing and getting interviews and those sort of things together.
I just wanted to know what the turnover date for the commissioners would be,
The what?
for when the new commissioners would be coming on.
Don't know. The terms expire the end of April. And then it will depend on when the board actually appoints them. And sometimes it's not, sometimes it takes a little longer than we want. That's all I have on business.
Okay.
Schedule, nothing scheduled in April. May 14th, we have a study session for ZDO 268, which is the next package of ZDO amendments that Jennifer will be bringing forth to you. And again, it's study session. And then we will have election of officers at that date, which is the first meeting after the terms expire.
I'd just like to
We-
say I will most likely not be at that meeting as that is my due date.
Okay? Thank you.
All right.
Congratulations.
The other thing on the Board of County Commissioners, the adoption, I think I mentioned to you, the board verbally adopted the mining application down in Canby, Traverso Gold 5 mining application. That board order is scheduled to be adopted next week, a week from Thursday at their business meeting. All that seemed to be moving along well. And then we have a study session with the Board of County Commissioners on Tuesday, April 17th for consideration of your recommendation and adoption of the work program. Okay, that's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you. This meeting's adjourned.